Hey guys, I put my DingFu E10 840 watt hour battery on a diet and I got that baby down to 576 watt hours. How did I do it? Why did I do it? What does it mean? Let's get into it. So here's how I ended up with a 576 watt hour battery for my DingFu E10. Shortly after I got the bike and I saw how easy it was to change out the battery, I bought a second battery. It wasn't that expensive, and I felt like, it wouldn't hurt to have a second battery. But after 2 years, the OEM battery actually died, and I took it to a place in Atlanta that works on e-bikes and rebuilds e-bike batteries. And the guy there analyzed it and told me that the battery had a couple of dead cells. And he gave me an option. I could either have the cells replaced or have the battery completely rebuilt. I opted to have the battery completely rebuilt, and after a couple of months, he called me, said he had the battery ready. When I went out to pick up the battery was not the exact same length as the original battery. It had actually been extended about 1 to 2 millimeters, and I was afraid that if I jammed it into the frame, I may damage something on the bike. So I asked the guy to try to rebuild it and get it so that it would actually be the same length as the original battery. And he worked on it, but after a couple of months, he told me that he just couldn't get it to the same length. The materials that he used primarily for the insulation and the connections were just a little bit thicker, and he just didn't want to go with any other material. So he just didn't feel like he could rebuild the battery as an 840 watt hour battery. He and I discussed it, and we decided that it would make sense to rebuild the battery, but instead of rebuilding it as an 840 battery, have it as a smaller watt hour battery, because there's plenty of room in the case for building out the battery. I've always felt the bike was a little heavy with the 840 watt hour battery, and I sort of welcomed the chance, once I thought about it, to have a smaller, lighter battery in the bike. So that's what he did. But he also told me that because the case was large and we were not going to use the full amount of the case, that instead of using the 18650 cells for the battery rebuild, he recommended we use the 21700 cells. He said those cells, would have more capacity or more power per the weight, but the batteries are a little bit bigger, but it didn't matter because I had plenty of room in the battery case. So that's what we did. Now, it took him a while to get it all built, but once he got everything worked out, turned out that putting it all together, he had room for a 576 configuration in that battery, and the battery fits perfectly. It's the exact same length. It fits perfectly in the bike, and everything seems to work out. So that's how I ended up with a DingFu 576 watt hour battery. Well, I've had the battery now it's mid-July. I've had the battery for a couple of weeks, and I've had a chance to put about 30 miles or so on the battery. And here are the pros and cons based on living with the battery for a little while. First of all, talking about the pros, the battery looks exactly the same as the OEM battery. If you just look at the two batteries side by side, you cannot tell them apart. But if you go and try to pick one up, it's very obvious because the 576 watt hour battery is much lighter feeling than the 840 watt hour battery. They use the same charger. That doesn't change, but the 576 watt hour battery seems to charge much faster, and I'm not sure if it's charging faster because it's less watt hours and or because the 21700 cells charge faster, but it clearly charges more quickly than the 840 watt hour battery. But there is a con, and that is that the range on the bike has been reduced down to about 70% of the range when it was an 840 watt hour battery. That means there's a 30% reduction in the range on the bike. So now let's talk about some of the details and comparison for the 576 watt-hour battery. And I'm going to show in this chart a comparison with the original 840. And also, just for comparison purposes, I put up a Shimano 504 watt-hour battery. So just so you have a couple of different reference points here. The one in the middle with the sort of the yellow orangish highlighting is the 576 watt-hour battery. Now, on the first line, I'm just showing the cells. The 840 and the Shimano battery are both 18650 cells, but the 576 21700 cells. All of the battery cells are 3.6 volts. The Shimano and 840 are 3.5 amp hours per cell, but the 21700 is 4 amp hours. Now, to get the voltage, the cells are connected in series. And for the 840 and 576, there are 13 cells in the group. And on the Shimano, there's 10. And when you multiply, as I was showing on lines 5 and 6, the number of cells times the voltage, you get the nominal voltage for the 840 and the 576, which is 46.8. The Shimano battery is 36 volts. Now, to get the amp hours, there are 5 groups of parallel cells for the 840, 3 for the 576, and 4 for the 504 Shimano battery. When you go through, as I do on line 8 and 9, and multiply the cells by the amp hours, or the cells that are connected in parallel, you get 17.5 amp hours for the 840, 12 amp hours for the 576, and 14 amp hours for the Shimano battery. Now, multiplying, as I do on lines 10 and 11, the voltage times the amp hours will give you the nominal watt hours. And for the 840 battery, it's 819. For the 576, it's 561. For the Shimano, it's 504. But because the 840 battery and the 576 are marketed as, if you will, 48 volt batteries, instead of multiplying the amp hours times the actual 46.8, when you multiply it by 48, you get the 840 and the 576. There's no difference between the nominal and the marketing value for the voltage for the Shimano battery, so this difference doesn't occur on the Shimano battery. So in summary, the 840 battery is 13 cells connected in series and 5 cell groups in parallel. That would be 13S5P. The 576 is 13S3P. The Shimano is 10S4P. Total number of cells in the 840 battery are 65, 39 in the 576, 40 in the Shimano battery. Total weight is 8.75 on the 840, 5.65 for the 576, and 5.8 for the Shimano battery. Well, there you have it, guys. Those are the details on my 576 watt-hour battery and my DingFu E10. I hope I've given you something to think about, and I'll see you at the top.